The first impression that comes to our mind about any college: tall buildings, big classrooms, large lobby areas, thick books, IT labs, assignments, class tests, and projects, nothing besides that. Every hour, minute, second spent here help us carving and shaping our persona, cultivating innovative mindsets for the challenging world. Learning is a lifelong process. Sharing knowledge, inculcating values of life, spark the innovative horizons of mind. Fun and frolic is the nature of every nook and corner here. A daily dose of thrill we are sure to get here.
A child is meant to learn, not to own. Mahatma Gandhi says, if we are to teach real peace in this world, and if we are to carry on a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children. Good afternoon to one and all present here. I, Shreya Jha, student of BJMC second year, welcome you all to the program on World Day Against Child Labour, organized by SPARC, Students with Positive Attitude and Resonating Communication, the Student Council of DME Media School. World Day Against Child Labour is an international labor organization sanctioned holiday first launched in 2002, aiming to raise awareness and activism to prevent child labor, and is held every year on June 12th, with the intention to foster the worldwide movement against child labor. This year's World Day Against Child Labor focuses on action taken for the 2021 International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. It is the first World Day since the universal ratification of the ILO's Convention number 182 on the worst forms of child labor, and takes place at the time when the COVID-19 crisis threatens to reverse years of progress in tackling the problem. Today's special guest is Mr. Miguel, a child rights activist and the founder and executive director of UTSAH, Universal Team for Social Act and Help, a child rights NGO based in Guwahati, Assam. Mr. Queah will interact with the students on the scourge of child labor in the country, which will be followed by cultural activities performed by the members of SPARC. Now, I would like to invite Professor Amrish Saxena, Dean DME Media School, to share a few words with us.
Thank you, Shreya. As we all know that we have gathered here in this particular event to talk about or to observe this World Day Against Child Labor, which is observed every year on 12th of June. The basic aim, the basic objective of observing this particular day is to spread awareness about the illegal practice of child labor that unfortunately still prevails in our country, or rather in the entire world. Child labor still exists, and children, mostly from poor families, they are forced to work in all kind of work, including the hazardous conditions. And this causes all mental, physical, and social exploitation by their employers. Such children are deprived of their childhood. They are deprived of even education. So this whole day was started at the initiative of this International Labour Organization, and then if we look into the other things related to this, the other UN organizations like UNICEF has also been involved into this. And if we quote the latest report of ILO, then there has been an increase despite all kind of efforts to spread awareness. Their number has increased about 16 crores, 160 million in the entire country. And as Shreya already pointed out, this is a year, or rather, more than a year since 2020, we have been facing this pandemic, not only in India, but the entire world. So in the light of this, the theme for this 2021 has been decided as Act Now and Child Labor. And this pandemic has created a lot of problems, as we have been going through the reports that many children have lost their one parent or both the parents. So there are problems that this problem of child labor is further to be intensified if the government does not come forward, or other international organizations do not come forward to do something to handle this problem of child labor. And if I can quote here a very important judgment that has been made by the Supreme Court recently, not exactly judgment, but it's an observation of the direction, wherein the Supreme Court has said that the adoption of the children who have been orphaned in the wake of COVID-19, that has been restricted in the light of the fact that there could be, this can lead to lot of trafficking of children. So the Supreme Court has put a rider on this, that this whole adoption has to be done under the supervision of the Central Adoption Resource Authority. So in nutshell, this problem of the child labor is just one part of the whole story. Children, I mean, because of being a vulnerable section, are always at the receiving ends, and this problem is obviously much more in the developing countries like India. And as I was talking about, if there are 16 crore child labor in the entire world, then out of this, more than 1 crore belong to India. So obviously, India being a developing country, the problem is much serious here. So we have to be cautious of this problem. And the only thing at the citizens level that we can do, that we should try to create awareness on this issue. That is how we are organizing this session. And obviously, it is expected, as I already said, it is expected from the state to take some concrete measures to ensure that this problem reduces further in coming years.
Thank you so much, sir. Let us now watch audio-visual performance on how every child in the country has the right to education by Rishabh Patel, first-year student and member of SPARC.
देश का भविष्य किस ओर जाएगा जब नन्हे हाथों को बोझ तले दबा दिया जाएगा। अरे वो बच्चा कैसे भगवान का रूप कहलाएगा जो घर घर जाकर कूड़ा कचड़ा उठाएगा। अरे ओ माता पिता, आज शाम आपका पेट कैसे भर जाएगा जब आपका बच्चा शिक्षा छोड़ चौराहे पर गुब्बारे बेचने निकल जाएगा। अरे वो बच्चा बिन शिक्षा कैसे ऊंचाइयों को छू पाएगा जो बच्चा चंद पैसों के लिए पत्थरों और ईंटों को उठाएगा। आज शाम फिर वो चंद सिक्कों के लिए किसी इंसान के सामने हाथ फैलाएगा और वो इंसान उस बच्चे को देख मुंह फेर निकल जाएगा। और आखिर कब तक इन बच्चों को इस अंधकार में धकेला जाएगा। अरे ओ माता पिता, बच्चों को कमाने वाला नहीं काम आने वाला बनाओ। कमाने में और काम आने में बहुत फर्क है, लेकिन किसी के काम आना ये अच्छी शिक्षा और संस्कारों से ही आता है।
बच्चा शिक्षा का अधिकार पाएगा, तभी बाबा साहब, सरदार और गांधी जी का सपना साकार हो पाएगा और हमारा देश विश्व गुरु कहलाएगा।
क्योंकि देश आगे तब बढ़ पाएगा जब इस देश का बच्चा ईंट नहीं किताबें उठाएगा।
Wow, what a beautiful evening. Moving forward, now I invite Dr. Tina Mbora, Assistant Professor, DME Media School, to introduce the guest and moderate the session.
Thank you, Shreya. Well, we have a very special guest with us today, as was already introduced. Miguel Queah, an alumnus of St. Stephen's College, New Delhi, is the founder and executive director of UTSAH, a leading child rights organization based in Guwahati, Assam. Through his organization UTSAH, Miguel has provided social services and legal support to more than 300 victims of child sexual abuse. He acts as a support person under the POCSO Act, empaneled with the Child Welfare Committee of Kamrup Metro, Assam. He has worked closely with several organizations, including Childline, District Child Protection Unit, in coordinating rescue and rehabilitation of child and adolescent laborers. Recently, He drafted the SOP on child labor response, which was notified by the government of Assam. He is known for the conceptualization of the innovative Assam Police Shishu Mitra program, one of the largest and comprehensive child-friendly policing programs in the country, inaugurated by the Assam Chief Minister in 2019. Miguel has provided in-depth training and mentoring support to over 800 police personnel across the northeast of India in child rights and child protection. He has also trained members of JJBs, CWCs, Zila Parishads, Gaon Panchayats, school teachers, etc. across the country. Miguel is also the member of the Child Labour Task Force, the Child Protection Committee, and the Joint Task Force for Women and Children, Kamrup Metro District by the Government of Assam, where he plays an active role. He regularly represents Assam and the northeast of India in all policy level consultations organized by the Government of India, Supreme Court Committee on Juvenile Justice, state governments, among others. Miguel, welcome to DME. We are absolutely delighted to have you with us today. And I don't think there could have been a person better than you to grace this occasion today, especially with your so many years of experience in the field. You have worked with the government, you have worked with various stakeholders, you have worked individually, founded your own organization. Our students are all eager to learn a few things from you. So they had sent in a lot of questions, which I compiled and sorted through to have this much needed conversation with you today.
Thank you, Teenam. I'm so glad I could be here. And I especially thank DME Media School for inviting me, because generally what happened, there are very few times when someone from the Northeast is invited to speak, right? So I'm very happy to be here amongst all of you. Yes.
So to begin with, Miguel, can you give a brief picture of the existing ground realities of the issue of the rampant child labor in India?
Yeah, I'll give a very short kind of background. First we need to understand how, since today is World Day Against Child Labor, first we need to understand how ILO defines child labor. That is very important for us to know. I'm sure many of you have read, but still I would like to maybe speak about it once again. See, when we talk about child labor, how ILO looks at child labor is that any kind of work, that basically deprives a child, you should remember, of their childhood, of their potential, and of their dignity, and harms their physical and psychological development. So that kind of work has been defined as child labor work by the International Labour Organization. This is very important for us to understand. It connects to a lot of, when we know the exact definition, that is where we can place the subject of child labor and have discussions around it. Well, like one of your professors had already mentioned, that child labor is a huge problem globally as well as in India. We have around 8.3 million child laborers working in India currently from the age group of 5 to 14 years. Now, where are they working? See, some of the states where child labor, incidence of child labor is huge, are states like Uttar Pradesh, which is huge, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, so Madhya Pradesh. So these are states which have shown increasing trends in child labor. The problem is with the interesting problem with child labor is that we only talk about it in narratives these days. The reason being because the last census was done in 2011. So for the younger generations, now see, information should be updated all the time, right? So whenever you see any kind of research studies, when you see any kind of conversations and dialogues, it is always a narrative. Nothing is specific, because the last comprehensive study was done in 2011. That is more than a decade back. So, and considering the fact that the younger generation are very much in need of new and updated information, I'm sorry, the only thing I can speak about now is in narrative, So you can see that state like, for example, a state like Uttar Pradesh accounts for 20% of the country's child labor. Now, where are these child laborers working? In places like Maharashtra, in places like, Rajasthan, in places like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. So we see, for example, they are working in salt industries, cotton industries, agriculture basically accounts for 70% of the country's child laborer. The second being the services sector. The third is, of course, the industry. So what happens is when we look at the problem, it is huge. Like I said, numbers of 2011 show the gamut of the problem as being very massive. So what happens now, if you look at, so then what we do is we try to again, try to understand the magnitude, since we don't have accurate data, with other data. For example, if you look at the NSSO study, which was conducted in 2017, 2018, 3.2 crores children were out of school. So where were these what were these out of school children doing? So what we assume is either many of the children are actually being trafficked, they are being married off, or the third sector have joined the labor force, the workforce. So that is which gives us an indication of the magnitude of the problem. So these are various. This is basically the ground level problem. The other problem is that while we talk about in the agricultural labor, which is constitute the largest, we talk about services sector labor, we talk about industry labor. The problem, another big problem that we are observing right now across the country, you will see that there is very scant data on one. In Delhi, for example, you might have seen those children begging on the streets, right? So on the traffic junctions. So a sizable number of children who are living and working on the streets. We have no conclusive data, but observational data suggests that there are so many across the country. In Calcutta, if you look at Calcutta, if you look at Rajasthan, if you look at Delhi, if you look at Haryana, in the southern parts of India, you'll see the street children problem is also huge. And most of these street children are working as child laborers. The other factor, the hidden children. The hidden children are those who are working as domestic child laborers. Now, what happens is it is very difficult to basically penetrate into these the citadels of apartment blocks and private households where a lot of children are being employed and exploited as child laborers. The only time we get an indication of such children is when, for example, Childline does a massive rescue, or Childline reveals data that there were 1,000 children rescued in a particular year. That is where we get indications of the problem. But we are still not sure. Even if there's a census data, will employers disclose data on the children they employ as laborers? They will never, right? So even if data comes out, we can only have an indication of the problem. However, nonetheless, even the indication is so huge. We're talking about 8.3 million children. We're talking about 3.2 crore children out of school. And the sizable amount of that is in the workforce. So even the indication is so huge, you can only imagine how big the problem would be if we were to have accurate data. So it is a crucial problem. It eats away into the children's childhood. What happens when a child is employed as a child labor? If you've seen, a lot of people justify that we are giving them education. But if you see majority of the child laborers who have been rescued, they are stunted. They suffer malnutrition. Many of them have been physically and psychologically abused, and many have been sexually assaulted too. So this is the current situation of children right now, children who are in the workforce. So it is high time that we come together to address this issue at every level, at every stage, at every conversation. Child labor should have priority. So this is the basic background of child labor in India right now.
So if we dig really deep, what would you say is the root cause of these practices like child labor, child trafficking, or child sexual abuse which exists in the society?
Yeah, let's start with child labor. See, one of the most influencing factors, like we all know, and it is part of our every conversation, is economic, in nature. So we know that economy plays a huge role. Of course, like we all know, poverty is a huge issue. If you look at India's, like again, India is, the data in India is a huge problem. There is scant data on everything in the country. There are so many data, but of course, you don't know what to rely on. But however, we have been following these researches done by World Bank and Pew's Research Center recently. They say that around 134 million, people in India are living on less than $2 a day, which is very, very low. That means you have millions of people living under poverty. Again, like the last time, like I mentioned last time, that India has not also counted its poor since 2011. However, again, World Bank came up with the data that above around 364 million people in India are poor. So these are huge numbers, right? So you can only imagine the situation of children who have been born in this context, right? So that is one of the reason is because families are so poor that they cannot afford the livelihood of these children, of those children. And therefore, they have to push those children into the workforce. That is one, right? Secondly, the deeper roots, you may see that, the sustained poverty, sustained lack of education in families, which leads to large-sized families. What happens when you have a family of 6 children and you have an income as low as $2 a day? You cannot sustain, and you have no option left, right? So you have to push those children into the economic workforce so that they can sustain. You can, feed your children. Now, of course, we can also go into deeper reasons of why poverty. There are a lot of these socio-political, geopolitical issues like, like caste, ethnicities, which plays out on a person's economic status in the society. Now, those collectively have an impact on the increasing child labor problem. So yes, like I said, economic poverty is one of the biggest. However, social issues also play a huge role in contributing to this increasing trend of child labor in India. You asked about trafficking. Again, trafficking, because like I said, primarily because of livelihood. Why livelihood issues? I'll give us example like in a state like Assam, where every year there are recurring floods, and where lakhs of people get displaced every year. In fact, Assam has a record of the highest number of internally displaced persons in the world. So what during floods and conflict? So what happened during floods when people lose their livelihood, they lose their cattle, they lose their paddy fields? What do? They and because of a weak rehabilitative system, they have no other option but to send their children to work outside, to areas where they can earn a source of living for the family. And most of this migration, this movement is unsafe, and that's why they fall into traps of of trafficking, where they're either forced into forced labor, into bonded labor, or into sex trafficking. So these issues are linked to this larger, economic, social, and other, natural disasters, which can promote unsafe migration, finally resulting in trafficking. Child sexual abuse, of course, as long as the subject of sex will exist and people will have scant education on sex, and then, of course, coupled with patriarchal value systems, power divides, gender divides, we are going to have the problem of sexual abuse of children. Children are very young. They are dependent on adults all the time for their protection, survival, development needs. And if you look at the data, you will find that that 80% of the perpetrators are someone known to the child. So someone who the child trusts in, right? And because they are small children, they're very amicable, very easily manageable. You can kind of, use deceit to gain their confidence, and thereby, since you already have a society that is very unusually sexualized, and there is a power difference, and thereby children become very easy victims of sexual abuse, in societies. So in short, yeah, those were I think some of the reasons why these 3 problems exist.
So, Miguel, what are the roles being played by different stakeholders like the government, police, NGOs, and other bodies like the UNICEF, ILO in this matter, in the curbing of child labor?
See, everyone, like International Labour Organization is a UN agency. It has an international mandate of setting the standards, the global standards of labor work, right? And child labor falls under that ambit. So it does a lot of, for example, it makes conventions through which it sets standards for its member nations. Then it works, or it advocates with governments, basically the member states of the General Assembly, to ensure that all the regulations, the standards that are set in the United Nations are pursued by the member states, and they are able to fulfill those standards, those international commitments in their own states. So International Labour Organization plays a very broad, role in advocating with all their member nations to ensure that everyone has a very robust labor system in their own countries. And since child labor also falls under it, so ILO has been doing, for example, I think Shreya spoke about the convention on the worst forms of child labor recently. Likewise, convention on minimum wages was also passed, was adopted by India recently. So ILO's role is a big international role to ensure that the commitments that a member nation makes through an international treaty, those member nations can abide by the provisions of that treaty as well. So they have a lot of different programmatic approaches which they operate, which they kind of implement through their country offices around the world. UNICEF, of course, has a role because UNICEF basically is responsible for implementing the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's the International Treaty on Child Rights. There also Article 32 of that convention clearly mentions that every child has a right to protection from labor exploitation, any form of labor exploitation. So UNICEF, so there is the intersection where UNICEF comes in, and UNICEF has to works with, again, advocates with the different member nations of the or the signatories of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, so that every standard set forth in that convention is implemented effectively in all the member states, including that of child labor. NGOs, of course, there are international NGOs who have mandates of working on child protection, because the entire subject of child labor primarily comes under the ambit of child protection. So all organizations, INGOs or national NGOs, local NGOs, CSOs, who have a mandate of working on child protection and work on and are willing or have mandates of working on the child labor problem, have different kind of programmatic approaches. Some NGOs work on rescue. Like, for example, Child and India Foundation, which has now, of course, collaborated with the government of India. One of the mandates is to rescue children. So they have a partnership now. The Child India Foundation has a partnership with the government of India, and they run through civil society organizations across the country in different cities and different districts, which are operated by NGOs mostly. Then there are grassroots NGOs who work on prevention. For example, working on child labor issues in the rural parts of India. Like some work on rehabilitation. Some NGOs run children's homes, which have a responsibility for the rehabilitation of rescued child laborers, right? And then some NGOs run the National Child Labor Project schools. These schools are basically meant to, provide bridge education to rescued child laborers so that they can be mainstreamed into formal education sometime later. So those NCLP schools are also run by civil society organizations or NGOs. So everyone has their different role. The police, of course, has a role in rescue. Since child labor is now a cognizable offense, police has a role in registering an FIR, investigating the issue, arresting the offenders, filing a charge sheet, deposing on the offense at the courts of law, accompany Childline or other NGOs in rescue missions. So police has also different kinds of roles under different laws and under different policies. Yeah.
And what are the provisions defined within the Indian legal system for the protection of these children and for the punishment of those who are engaged in such practices?
See now, what happens is the child labor laws. There are many in the country. If you look at the or many provisions of the Indian law, it refers to the issue of child labor. One is, if you look at the primary, one of the primary is child labor problem is linked to education. Like I said before, that children who are out of school are probably in the workforce, right? So if you look at if you look at the Constitution of India, Article 21A, it talks about every child's right to education. So the Constitution believes that every child should be in school and not in the workforce in the first place, right? Then if you look at Article 24, Article 24 prohibits the employment of children in of the Constitution of India, prohibits children in factories or any hazardous employment, right? Then Article 39 and the Directive Principles of State Policy, it says that the state has to work to ensure that children are protected from any form of economic exploitation, and that children should not be in vocations that are not suited to their age. It is clearly mentioned. Then Article 23 prohibits beggary or any kind of forced labor. So those are there. Those constitutional provisions already exist. Now, if you look at the Indian Penal Code, the Indian Penal Code 374, it prohibits, use of children or in compulsory labor. It penalizes that, right? So these are some provisions which are there. Of course, there is the mammoth, the biggest law, that is the Child and Adolescent Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986, which probably most of you must have come across. Child labor, child basically means any child who has not completed their 14th year of age is under the definition of a child. An adolescent, basically, who has completed 14 but has not completed 18th year of age, has been defined in the Child and Adolescent Labor Prohibition Regulation Act, which in short we call CALPRA, CALPRA. So in CALPRA, what happens? It penalizes. It says that child, as in below 14, should not be in any vocation, should not have employment anywhere, right? Apart from, there is of course a little two kind of exceptions where children are working in family enterprises. Of course, activists and practitioners like us all around the country are trying to battle that thin line, because while the law says that you cannot work in enterprises, you can work in family enterprises, but it should not hamper your school hours. It should be after school hours. But what if that family enterprise is a sweatshop, or a slaughterhouse, or something which is not, good for the child? So that has not been very clearly defined. But anyway, the second provision is that the exception is that children who are working in the entertainment industry, they can work subject to certain protections. Adolescents, on the other hand, can work in almost all kinds of professions, apart from hazardous professions. So in mines and industries, in garages, in firecracker factories, in what is bangle, diamond jewelry factories, so they cannot be allowed to work in hazardous occupations. So children nowhere except for home enterprise during when they're off school hours, but they should be in school, enrolled and going to school otherwise. And if they are in the entertainment industry, they can work. However, adolescents can work in almost all professions, apart from professions that are hazardous to them. The penalties are basically in child or adolescents. The CALPRA defines that if you are convicted of employing child labor, you have to give you're caught when you're caught, basically. So you have to give a fine of which starts at 20,000, might extend to 50,000 Indian rupees. If you are convicted, you might have jail time, which might start from 6 months, but might be extended to 2 years as well. So these are the provisions of penalties that are there in the Child and Adolescent Labor Prohibition and Regulation Act. Of course, the Kalpra also, what it does, it sets forth various standards. See, some, like for example, adolescents who are working, in professions that they're allowed to work. It has also defined the terms and conditions of such employment. For example, they cannot be made to work for more than 5 hours per day. They cannot be made to work more than 3 hours in one go, without 1 hour break. So they cannot work from 7 p.m. till 8 a.m. in the morning. So there are such regulations also there. That's why it's called Prohibition and Regulation Act. So in situations where adolescents are working, they have to work under specific terms and conditions. Employers cannot exploit them, right? And in fact, if you look at the other law, the Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children Act, Section 79 penalizes exploitation of child employee. So anyone who is employing a child, or an adolescent in this particular case, and is not following the standards, it will amount to exploitation, are not paying the wages as per Minimum Wages Act. So what happens? They are, they are penalized basically. The other, there is, India is a country of laws and policies. Look at the Factories Act, the Beedi and Cigar Workers Act, Plantation Labor Act, Domestic Workers Act, the Mines Act, the Bonded Labor System Regulation Act. So there are this entire plethora, a basket of acts, because literature is so much, implementation is always a problem. However, all these acts have one thing in common, is that they do not allow employment and exploitation of children in the economic workforce. So these are, in short, some of the legal provisions. There was also a national policy on child labor, which again stressed on rescue, rehabilitation, educational support to children. So that national policy on children was very old. It's 1987, right after the act had come into being. And from that act, we got the National Child Labor Project. This policy mentioned that there should be a scheme to support the educational needs of children. So we have the National Child Labor Project, which aims at basically providing bridge education support to children who are rescued from child labor workforce. Because most children who have been rescued from child labor, they're out of school children and they need to be put back into the mainstream, right? So what happens is that the National Child Labor Projects work as the bridge between, for basically to get the child from out of school situation to a formal education situation. So these are the various acts and laws and policies in the country that probably, if we had time, we could have gone more. But yeah, I can take the next question, Tina.
Okay. So with everything that organizations like yours are doing, or government taking different initiatives, do you think our country is any close to completely curbing this menace?
See, of course, we have had a reduction. We have had a reduction before of the child labor problem. From 2001 to 2011, if you look, there has been a drop in the child labor ratio. But now we have new realities like the pandemic. I think your next question is on the pandemic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe I can club both of them.
Yes. Please go ahead.
I can. Yeah. So what happens is this pandemic has gotten in these are very uncharted territories we are going into, and children, will have to bear the brunt. We have already seen. Now, if you look at, I was just reading this news article this morning that if you look at the poverty index, it seems or unemployment, data, it seems over 120 million people lost their employments in that way last year when the pandemic just began. So you have a lot of people who are unemployed. The mass migration of labor force in the country was indication that a lot of people were leaving their jobs and going back home, and all these people were jobless. They didn't have any source of income or livelihood. If you look at, I was just reading through again a World Bank report, which says that 12 million people have the chance of slipping into poverty due to the pandemic. Now, these are huge numbers, right? Now, what happens is, now each of these families have children as well. Now, when you're not being able to address their livelihood, their basic, needs of food, clothing, shelter, what else do you do? And since children are, the connect is that if you also look at the connecting data, like I always say, that 1.5 billion schools have shut, have closed, and it has impacted over 247 million children in the country. Now, many of the children are going into the public school, as in the government schooling system, which also have no access. Most of them belonging to poor families, to migrant families. Just say a family from Bihar who was working in Uttar Pradesh had their children educated there. They had to come back right now. So those children are all out of school. And it is proven, all studies prove that when there is an increase in the poverty, if there is a 1% increase in the poverty rate, that means 0.7%, it is contributing to 0.7% increase in the child labor problem as well. So when the poverty rate increases, the child labor problem also increases along with it. Because children are, now everyone is, having issues with money. Everyone is having problems. So employers are now basically in places like Rajasthan. I was just talking to some practitioners in Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh. People are now looking for children. Why? Because if a minimum wage for an adult labor is 95, children can be paid 43 rupees. So actually people are looking for younger people now, because everywhere there is a slump, right, in the economy. So people are looking for children so that it is cheaper to work. Children have no bargaining skills as well. They're not an organized force. So what happens is, this is how the pandemic has affected. And we only hope that that we focus on, on rehabilitation, focus on the larger problem of Indian poverty, work on the social dynamics, work on more strengthened, rehabilitative measures. In that way, we can see that it will take time. It will definitely take a lot of time because, it is very fractured. The entire economy, society now is very fractured. It will take a long time to come out of it. But nonetheless, if each and everyone, the state, the civil society, all other agencies play their part, I'm sure it will be addressed in a few years' time.
So what can we as individuals with no affiliation towards any government body or child rights organizations do on our own end to help contribute towards the end of this child labor?
Yeah, at different levels. Like I said, one, there is no data. So, see, research organizations, schools, colleges, who have nothing to do with the government per se, but they have a huge academic, what do you say, gold mine, capital, who can do this research. But what is happening? Where is the empirical evidence? We need evidence of child labor on ground. So they can, institutions can play, or think tanks can play a role in research. Secondly, there are, and after research, some organizations can also, work on awareness, which is very important at individual levels. Awareness that one should be aware of the problem of child labor and how it impacts the child's, all-round development. If you see children who have worked as child laborers, when they grow up, they have so many issues. They've just grown up in that small setup, right, inside a household with constant abuse and exploitation. People say that, okay, we have given so much love and we have given you food, but the child had to sleep in some floor, had to have little food, had to do with little food, had to go through recurrent psychological violence, sexual violence. Such a child does not grow up to be a very productive individual. And this also impacts the economy, by the way, when you don't have productive people. Institutions, young people can actually go and spread awareness. Now, social media is so huge. Today, say how many of you are here? How many of you have shared a status on child labor prevention? I'm sure 20%, maybe, right? Lesser than that. So, so what we need to do that in our own languages, in the way our societies can understand. We have to break down the barriers of communication as well, and we have to sensitize people of the problem and what happens to a child labor. What is the law? What is the punishment? The second aspect, which is very important, is that people are very scared to report child labor. I have seen this across India. Oh, please don't tell my name. This I have written also quite often on my social media. I've been battling this, that why is it so difficult to stand up for the right in this country? And I think only the youth can change that, because youth don't care, right? So so what happens is people don't report child labor because they feel, okay, it's my neighbor, it'll jeopardize my social relationship with my neighbor, or they might cause me harm. But because of this kind of the very what can I say? This fear and apprehension is one of the reasons why children are not being rescued. Like example, I'll give you recently this child, and I'll talk an example from Assam in Nagaon. In district Nagaon, there was a child laborer who was burnt alive. A 12-year-old girl child who was burnt alive. In the same place, in the same last year, child was raped and she was impregnated. But the community knew about it, that there was a child labor employment. Nobody spoke. Now all the organizations are saying and decrying. It's easier to speak in a group, right? But no one spoke up. We could have saved the girl child, but we could not, because they said that, okay, we were scared, they are our neighbors, we knew them, someone's mama, someone's chacha. But we have to put a full stop to it. The day you start raising a voice when your mama is doing wrong, a lot of things will go right in this country. What we do is, because of our own social relations, we don't report a lot of crimes, even in sexual violence. Like I said, that most of the offenders are your mamas, chachas, grandfathers, grandmothers, and this one's friend and that one's cousin. Most offenders are that, and people don't report because they will say, if you report your mama, he's going to jail. And children have to endure, this entire trauma for such a long time. But it's time that young generations, like you say, that people now young generations, this is Gen Z, right? It's better than the millennials. So so we don't care, and that should be the attitude. That a wrong is a wrong. Let's call a spade a spade. It's time, and thereby you have to report. Teachers, for example, have to instill that courage in the children, that you have to report. If you see a wrong in this country, you give your life for it if you have to, but you will always stand for the right. And those things change. We idolize our freedom fighters and have heroes in our society, but we don't want to be one. It's time that we have to be our small idols in our own way, and then we will see that there's a reduction in the issue. And you can do community level awareness campaigns in your college, for example. Yeah, or in education institutions, you should do awareness camp and sensitization camps on child sexual abuse, trafficking, child labor. I'm sure a lot of people in your college might have a child labor. Someone knows. It happens generally, right? You might know someone, and with the day that person takes that stand, the change will begin, the process of change. So you have to report. Reporting is also very important. Create awareness in communities. Work with the government to improve, like NGOs. How do NGOs begin? By someone's idea, right? One day someone was having, for example, sharing it happens a lot in Assam. Someone was sharing noodles, a plate of noodles in a cafe, and then the idea of change comes into your mind, and suddenly you are running one of the biggest organizations in the state. So it starts with that, but an idea. So you can also start, things like that, from conversations of issues that you feel from your heart. And in that, maybe sometime you can see that people also think about children and take processes of change making ahead, and that can happen. Many of you might be 10 years time some of the top child rights practitioners in the country. And how will that begin? When you keep the conversation alive in your colleges, in your drawing rooms, in your parents, in your chachajis and mamaji's house, everywhere. so that we have to put a stop to this. And and advocate with the government on how to strengthen, rehabilitative measures as well. Economics, ideas, think tanks are doing that. So you can also be a part of that movement. Yes.
And, the media also plays a very crucial role in this whole matter. So as media students and future media professionals, what are the important things that our students must keep in mind, or what should they expect their role to be when they venture out into the world as media professionals?
See, one is media sensitization on the subject. It is very important, like everywhere else. Media, of course, nationally, people are aware. Media should first understand the subject, the magnitude of the problem. Media is the forum where we can actually get in that wind of change, because media can mold opinions. While we talk about the child labor problem, we're not talking enough, maybe. So the media can take this role in educating, sensitizing, the entire country on the child labor problem. What happens to the child? While we cover the problem, in India, I would just like to touch upon one thing, that the child labor problem increases because it is not reported, right? There are no FIRs. It's a cognizable offense. If you look at the NCRB data of 2019, Madhya Pradesh has so much child labor, only 4 were reported in 2019. Uttar Pradesh has the highest child labor problem in the country. Only 9 were reported in the police station, 9 cases in 2019. So what happens? Media can question that what is happening? Why is it not being reported? Now, child labor is again a compoundable offense. There's another problem. A compoundable offense, it can be compounded by the Deputy Commissioner under Section 14D of the Child Labor Act. Now, when it's a compoundable offense, what a lot of people get away. But this cannot go on for too long, right? It has to somewhere, the offense, somewhere people have to be held accountable. There's no accountability. So these pertinent questions can be raised by media houses, that what is happening? Because media can ask questions, and media represents the people. And that can bring about a wind of change in the country. So that direction, that thinking, the collective thinking of a society, that direction can be provided by leaders in the media houses. It also begins with now when you're in college and schools, running these campaigns, regular campaigns, until it goes into the DNA of every Indian or every South Asian that child labor exploitation, employment and exploitation is a criminal offense, and it has to stop. So those things media can play a huge role in.
Amrish sir, any questions from your end?
So thank you, Mr. Miguel. You almost covered all aspects of the child labor, but as a former journalist and as a media educator, one thing which always strikes my mind is the role of the state. Despite all social, economic, other reasons, despite being so many laws, as you just now said, the implementation part, and this is somewhere which is reflected on the either we should say inefficiency or apathy on the part of the implementing authorities, and finally the state and the government. So what will you say on the role of the state in this problem?
See, that is, of course, the India, I remember Tharoor. India is not as good or as bad as it looks like, So it's also always a double story. So while the state has made strides, I will not say, for example, we have addressed the child labor problem to an extent, but we have not done enough. Now, I think it will probably link to maybe if we had given more, stress on the first 5-year plans on elementary education rather than higher education, we would have seen a difference maybe, how leaders are, how our societies are. But again, coming back to the implementation, yes, there is a problem. There's a huge gap in implementation. Because for a long time, how did the state function? It's like there's an adage, sarkari office type, functioning. So there was no competence, there was no zeal, competence, accountability, never existed. Media is also a very new feature. Before media, I mean, everything and anything happened in this country, right? So now at least there's a accountability to a certain extent. Civil society organizations have become multifold, So there is a lot of accountability on the part. Civil society organizations also support the state in implementing. While it is easier to say than done, state has its own pros and cons. But if the state took it more seriously, the implementation aspect, for the state, what my experience has been while working very closely with the state, for the state, everything is an event, a launch, certificate giving, launch, media events. So everything is that event form. Now one should come out of that event mentality. One should work into implementation mentality. They should have that idea in their mind that humko ye sirf launch everywhere you see. Crores and crores are spent on launches, but implementation is very bleak. But that is where, again, media houses need to question, the state, that why so much on a launch and not on implementation. So state has to now change. And how can it change? It can change by young minds who are questioning them, think tanks and research organizations who are raising pertinent questions, providing empirical evidence of the problem in implementation, right? So then the state becomes aware. And then NGOs like us, activists like us keep on shouting and pushing the state that, no, that please get the things done. So I think the state has to reflect, the way, in fact, a lot of things need reflection, not only in India, but in entire South Asia, the way governance, the governance mechanisms run. Everything is a template. Everything is, it's like we use in corporate houses. Like the corporate houses, use things like, okay, I mean, it's the government has lost its heart somewhere, the soul, what I mean. It's become very concrete. We have to do this launch, we have to do this, we have to create this target. For example, if we are giving out a scheme has to be launched, and then scheme has to cover, say, 20,000 children. So there is no vision to the bigger problem. Even if you talk to bureaucrats, you ask them what is the vision for the state. Very few will have a vision. So, this leadership, maybe younger generations, when they go on to become leaders and, politicians later on and be a part of the governance system, probably they will change the way, things are perceived or worked out in the government, the machinery. The state has a lot to reflect. Yes, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Even in Corona time, in fact, I mean, despite so many problems being faced by the people, these politicians were busy in opening or inaugurating the ambulances, oxygen cylinders. Instead of tackling the problem, they were busy in the inauguration thing, as you pointed out. In fact.
Yes, it's all about the shusha, and the showbiz has to be there. That is the problem. We have to start thinking from our heart now. Then the change will come.
So thank you so much, Miguel, for throwing light upon such an important issue. Well, now I would like to hand it over to Shreya. There are some cultural events also, programs by the students. Please stay on to watch them. Shreya,
Yes.
over to you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful and enlightening discussion. Let us watch audiovisual performance on biography of Kailash Satyarthi by Pranjali, first-year student and member of SPARC.
पिछले कुछ समय में भारत की जिन हस्तियों ने दुनिया भर में अपनी पहचान बनाई, अपना नाम कमाया, उसमें से एक नाम कैलाश सत्यार्थी का भी है। कैलाश सत्यार्थी एक भारतीय बाल अधिकार कार्यकर्ता है। बाल मजदूरी के खिलाफ चलाने वाले अभियान को कैलाश सत्यार्थी ने देश के साथ साथ विदेशों में भी फैलाया। उन्होंने 108 देश से 14,000 संगठनों के साथ मिलकर एक यात्रा आयोजित की, जिसमें लाखों लोगों ने शामिल होकर उस यात्रा में बाल मजदूरी को खत्म करने का निर्णय लिया। उनके इन्हीं कार्यों की वजह से उन्हें अंतर्राष्ट्रीय और राष्ट्रीय पुरस्कार भी मिल चुके हैं और उन्हें साल 2014 में नोबेल पीस प्राइज से सम्मानित किया गया, जिसकी वजह से दुनिया में देश का नाम रोशन हुआ। उन्होंने सन 1980 में बचपन बचाओ आंदोलन की शुरुआत, जिसकी वजह से विश्व भर में 144 देशों से 83,000 से अधिक बच्चों के अधिकारों की रक्षा के लिए कार्य कर चुके हैं। कैलाश सत्यार्थी जी ने बाल मित्र ग्राम की शुरुआत 2011 में की, जो हर गांव से बाल मजदूरी को मिटाकर उन बच्चों की सुख सुविधा और शिक्षा पे ध्यान देता है। सत्यार्थी जी ने बच्चों के साथ काम लेने को मानव अधिकारों से जोड़ा और इसके खिलाफ आवाज उठाई। वह इसे बच्चों के साथ होने वाले वैश्विक शोषण का सबसे प्रचलित रूप मानते हैं। वह ये भी कहते हैं इसी की वजह से आज दुनिया में अशिक्षा, गरीबी, बेरोजगारी और जनसंख्या वृद्धि जैसे मुद्दे आज मानवता के सामने खड़े हुए हैं। धन्यवाद।
Wow, that was indeed an informative AV. Let us now watch a skit performance, Kathni Karni Nahi, the tragedy of child labor by Naitik, Aryan, Yash, Mahima, Ananya, Suhani, Shubham and Priya, first year students and members of SPARC.
कहानियों की कमी नहीं है, बस नज़रों पर सवाल है। एक कहानी हम भी लाए हैं, जानना है कि आपके नज़रिए का क्या हाल है।
Hello everyone. As we all know that child labor is the biggest evil of our society. But if I say that I alone will end this evil, then I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Because we have to raise our voices together for the evil that has been spreaded in our society. We need to make understand those people who are letting our kids' future in danger. According to my research from Census 2011, the number of child laborers in India is 10.1 million, of which 5.6 million are boys and 4.5 million are girls.
Also, an important message that if you are a child or someone who wants to help a child to rescue them from those people or areas, so just quick dial on Childline helpline number, which is 1098. I hope you all will definitely support us in this cause. Thank you.
नमस्कार, जैसा कि आप सभी जानते हैं कि पिछली बार हमारी पार्टी ने बाल मजदूरी के खिलाफ काम किया था। अगर इस बार भी हमारी पार्टी सत्ता में आएगी तो हम सब मिलकर बाल मजदूरी के खिलाफ आवाज उठाएंगे। सभी को अच्छी शिक्षा मिले, यही हमारा लक्ष्य है। और शिक्षा ही एक ऐसा माध्यम है जिससे बाल मजदूरी जैसी विकट समस्या के खिलाफ जंग जीती जा सकती है।
अबे ओ लड़के, क्या कर रहा है? इस नुकसान का भरपाई कौन करेगा? तेरा बाप? कोई बात नहीं, चिंता मत कर, तेरी आने वाली तनख्वाह से ही ये चीज काटूंगा मैं। चल जाके देख।
बोलो साहब, क्या चाहिए?
तेरी उम्र कुछ ज्यादा ही छोटी नहीं है?
अरे साहब, तुम बोलो ना तुमको क्या चाहिए। अगर मेरे मालिक ने सुन लिया तो मुझे यहाँ से भी काम से निकाल देगा। वैसे ही आजकल ना खुश है मेरे काम से। आजकल के लोग काम वाम तो देते नहीं है, बस सवाल जवाब करते हैं। और अगर काम से निकाल दिया तो मैं क्या करूँगा? कैसे चलेगा मेरा घर? साहब, जिसके सर पर हाथ और हाथों में सहारा नहीं होता, बस वही इस दर्द को समझ सकता है। तुम बोलो ना साहब, तुमको क्या मांगता है?
यहाँ पे आके काम कौन करेगा?
आज तेरी माँ क्यों नहीं आई?
वो माँ की तबीयत थोड़ी खराब है, इसीलिए।
अजीब औरतें हैं, बच्चों को काम पर भेज दिया और खुद घर पे आराम कर रही हैं। तुम क्या मेरा मुंह देख रही हो? तुम काम करो ना अपना। यार, आजकल पता नहीं कैसे माँ बाप हैं, अपने बच्चों को काम पर भेज देते हैं। कैसी माँ है पता नहीं, अपने बच्चे से प्यार भी नहीं करती। खैर, हमें क्या, आगे जाकर तो इन्हें भी यही करना है।
बालकिन, काम हो गया। और मालकिन, भले ही मेरी माँ मुझे काम पर भेजती है, पर वो मुझसे बहुत प्यार करती है। खुद खाना नहीं खाती पर मुझे ज़रूर खिलाती है। बस मालकिन, इतना ही कहना था। अच्छा मालकिन, तो हम चलते हैं।
माँ, आज फिर एक बाबू ने मुझसे बोला तो इतना छोटा होकर काम क्यों करता है। ए माँ, तू सुन रही है मैं क्या कह रहा हूँ?
हाँ हाँ, सुन रही हूँ, सुन ही तो रही हूँ। पेट काट कर जिस बच्चे को निकाला था, आज वही पेट भरने को अपने बच्चों को दर दर भटका रही हूँ। आते जाते सड़कों पर हर दूसरा इंसान ये सवाल पूछ ही लेता है, कैसी निर्दयी माँ है, अपना पेट भरने को अपने बच्चों को काम पर लगाई है। अरे बोलते हैं पैदा ही क्यों किया। मेरी लाचारी पर थूकने वालों की कमी नहीं है, लेकिन इनमें से कोई मेरे घर नहीं आया। जिस सरकारी बाबू का हवाला दिए लोग घूमते हैं, कौन है ये? मुझे तो कभी नहीं दिखे, मेरे लिए तो कभी कोई नहीं आया। अरे कैसे सोच लेते हैं ये लोग कि जिस बच्चे को मैंने खून से सींचा है, अगर उसे खरोच भी लगती होगी तो इस माँ के दिल पर कुछ ना बीतती हो। कैसे सोच सकते हैं ये? मेरे बच्चे के बारे में ये मुझे बताएंगे। ये सवाल तो उस दिन उठेगा जिस दिन पेट में इनके रोटी नहीं होगी और हालत इस अबला जैसी होगी ना, उस दिन सवाल उठेगा कि ये बाल मजदूरी है या हम जैसों की मजबूरी है।
What a heart-touching performance. Now, I would like to invite Ishika Vadva, first-year student and member of SPARC, to give a poetry performance, Bachpan Ki Maut, Vulnerability of Children Involved in Child Labor.
बचपन की मौत। मैंने बचपन की मौत देखी है, सिर्फ मैंने ही क्या, लाखों औरों ने देखी है। जो हाथ बचपन में खेलने के लिए बनते हैं, मैंने उन्हें खिलौने बनाते देखा है। जो जख्म दर्द से रुला देते हैं, मैंने उन्हें उन जख्मों पर मुस्कुराते देखा है। जो पेट भूख से तिल में ला रहा होता है, मैंने उन्हें उस भूखे पेट से फसल काटते देखा है। जो सड़क किनारे 2 रुपए के लिए अखबार बेचते हैं, मैंने उनकी आंखों में उस अखबार को पढ़ने की उम्मीद देखी है। जो खाना खरीदकर घर वालों को खिलाते हैं, मैंने उन्हें पानी से अपना पेट भरते देखा है। जो विज्ञान शब्द का अस्तित्व तक नहीं जानते हैं, मैंने उन्हें रसायन फैक्ट्री में काम करते देखा है। जो हर दिन खुशहाल जिंदगी जीने का ख्वाब देखते हैं, मैंने उन्हें जीते जी मरते देखा है। मैंने बचपन की मौत देखी है और सिर्फ मैंने ही क्या, लाखों औरों ने देखी है।
Moving forward, let us now watch a mime act, Chote Kandho Par Badi Zimmedari, by Suchi and Himani, first-year students and members of SPARC.
कभी गाड़ियों के शीशे साफ करते, कभी सिग्नल पर फूल बेचते, कभी पेन और किताबें लिए सड़कों पर नजर आते हैं ये मासूम बचपन। देख जिनको लोग झूठी आहें हैं सिर्फ भरते, क्यों नहीं ये इनके बचपन के लिए कुछ कर गुजरते। कानून से क्या, संविधान से क्या, समाज के ठेकेदारों को बचपन को रोज कुचलते हैं मजबूरियों की आड़ों में। इनकी गुंडागर्दी तो देखो, अरे इनकी खुदगर्जी तो देखो। कहीं आँख फोड़ते, कहीं पैर तोड़ते, भगवान से भी नहीं ये डरते। जेबें अपनी भरने को हर रोज बचपन का कत्ल करते। देश का भविष्य है बचपन, क्यों नहीं इन पर लगा। ख्वाब सजने दे आँखों में, मुट्ठी भर आशा की किरण जगा। कभी अपने बच्चे की जगह रख देखो उस छोटू को, आंखें भर आएंगी एक पल भी अगर सोचो तो। अपनाओ इन्हें, दुत्कारो नहीं, उंगली पकड़ो, फटकारो नहीं। ले चलो ना इन्हें उजालों में, इन अंधियारे गलियारों से। एक तरफ हमारे बचपन सब आसानी से पाते हैं, हर वक्त फरमाइश की लंबी लंबी लिस्ट थमाते हैं। स्कूल का वर्क इन्हें रास नहीं आता, टीवी मोबाइल का शोर हर पल इन्हें भाता। मेहनत की जब बात आए, बहानों का सैलाब आए। एक गलियों में धूल खाता बचपन, मेहनत की बूंदों को तौलिए में छुपाता बचपन। ठोकर खाकर भी तूफान को मोड़ने का जज्बा रखने वाला बचपन। हौसले के पर लगा ख्वाबों को पूरा करता बचपन। माँ पिता भाई की भूख मिटाता बचपन। विद्यालय की खिड़की के अंदर पढ़ते बच्चों को ताकता बचपन। फिर भी हर पल आशा की किरण जगाता बचपन।
It was indeed an amazing performance. Before moving forward, I request all of you to fill the feedback form which will be shared with you in the chat box. I now would like to invite Professor Susmita Bala, HOD DME Media School, to address the gathering.
Thank you, Queah. Yes, child labor is an issue which we can see in every nook and corner of the country. In our homes, restaurants, dhabas, carpet weaving, fireworks, and we find them. But the majority of the people do not find anything wrong in this. I think we can handle this problem by creating awareness in the society. Thank you, Mr. Miguel, for throwing light on all aspects of child labor. Thank you all for attending this session and get benefited.
Thank you, ma'am. I now invite Ananya Verma, first year student and member of SPARC, to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Queah. Firstly, I would like to thank our special guest, Mr. Miguel Queah, who's child rights activist, founder, and executive director of UTSAH. Thank you, sir, for giving us such an insightful session and for sparing your time with us. I would like to extend my thanks to Professor Dr. Amrish Saxena, Dean DME Media School, and Susmita Bala, Professor, Head DME Media School, for their gracious presence. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Krishna Pandey, Assistant Professor, DME Media School, and Professor Dr. T. Nambura, DME Media School, for their constant support. I would like to thank Pramod Pandey, Assistant Professor, DME Media School, for their excellent technical support. I would like to thank Shruti Pandey and Shreya Jha for their guidance. I would also like to thank every SPARC member and faculty for motivating us and for participating with us in this event. Lastly, I would like to thank each and every participant for joining this event and making it a success. Thank you all for joining World Day Against Child Labor by SPARC.
Embraced digital paradigm shift by adopting technology-based learning.
Unlike other colleges, we adopted a two-step strategy. In step 1, teachers would be preparing the videos, students would be watching them. In step 2, the student would be coming to the tutorial, clarifying the doubts, making the presentations, and discuss with the teacher.
At DME, we have invested in the best in the class academic ERP, which allows us to have a 360-degree robust communication amongst all the stakeholders, students and faculty members.
DME's virtual learning mechanism is no less than real-time classroom teaching,
wherein the students are provided the pool of e-learning resources in the form of PPTs, video lectures and online classes in a very student-friendly environment.
There is no need of mental blocks. Online teaching is as effective and interesting as offline teaching. Let the students enjoy this new mode of education.
In DME, we believe in quality education. We take care of our students. We want to see them happy.
Mental and emotional health are one of the most challenging issues of present times. DME Mentoring Cell takes care of that. Not just this, we go beyond academic curriculum to instill the most important employability skills in our students.